Okay, we are going to read chapter 7. It's the longest one, but there's a lot of juicy goodness in it. So, yes. Okay. Chapter 7. It was when curiosity about Gatsby was at its highest that the lights in his house failed to go on one Saturday night. And as obscurely as it had begun, his career at Trimalchio was over. Only gradually did I become aware that the automobiles which turned expectantly into his drive stayed for just a minute and then drove sulkily away. Wondering if he were sick, I went over to find out. An unfamiliar butler with a villainous face squinted at me suspiciously from the door. "Is Mr. Gatsby sick?" "No," answered a pause. He added, "Sir," in a dilatory, grudging way. "I haven't seen him around, and I was rather worried. Tell him Mr. Carraway came over." "Who?" he demanded rudely. "Carraway?" "Carraway. All right, I'll tell him." Abruptly, he slammed the door. I guess more. My Finn, or his maid, informed me that Gatsby had dismissed in other words, fired. Okay, he had fired every servant in his house a week ago and replaced them with half a dozen others who never went into West Egg Village to be bribed by the tradesmen, but ordered moderate supplies over the telephone. The grocery boy reported that the kitchen looked like a pigsty, and the general opinion in the village was that the new people weren't servants at all. Okay, so just so you know, hey, go away notifications. Actually, okay, I know what to do with this now. Where are my notifications? Do not disturb. Okay, sorry. Okay, the concept with the servants. These are not servants at all. Okay, Gatsby fired all his servants. He's gonna claim because he doesn't want them talking about Daisy and stuff like that. I also think it has to do with a little bit that Gatsby needs a little bit extra bodyguardage. Okay, because he's doing some shifty things, and so all these people that are now at Gatsby's house are more muscle, more trying to protect him than actually, being a servant and cleaning the house, and that's why the kitchen is a pigsty and all that. Okay, so right here. Next day. Next day, Gatsby called me on the phone. "Going away?" I inquired. "No, old sport. I heard you fired all your servants. I wanted somebody who wouldn't gossip. Daisy comes over quite often in the afternoons." So the whole caravansary had fallen in like a card house at the disapproval in her eyes. "There's some people Wolfsheim wanted to do something for. They're all brothers and sisters. They used to run a small hotel." I see. He was calling up at Daisy's request. Would I come to lunch at her house tomorrow? Miss Baker would be there. Half an hour later, Daisy herself telephoned and seemed relieved to find that I was coming. Something was up. And yet I couldn't believe that they would choose this occasion for a scene, especially for the rather harrowing scene that Gatsby had outlined in the garden. The next day was broiling, or hot. Okay, so we got a little bit of symbolism with the heat and everything. But okay, so the whole thing here. Gatsby had outlined in the garden, and something funky's coming up. Okay, something was up. What is going on there? Nick suspects that Gatsby and Daisy are going to do something. Okay, they're going to, make a scene and basically tell Tom that Daisy's leaving him. Okay, so, and of course, the hot and nasty, okay, is the weather to reflect the anxiety of this. So it's a hot and nasty business, hot and nasty outside. Get it? Parallel. Nice. The next day was broiling hot, almost the last, certainly the warmest day of the summer. As my train emerged from the tunnel into sunlight, only the hot whistles of the National Biscuit Company broke the simmering hush at noon. The straw seats of the car hovered on the edge of combustion. The woman next to me perspired or sweated delicately for a while into her white shirtwaist, and then, as her newspaper dampened under her fingers, she lapsed despairingly into deep heat with a desolate cry. Her pocketbook slapped to the floor. "Oh my!" or her purse kind of slapped or fell to the floor. "Oh my!" she gasped. I picked it up with a wary bend and handed it back to her, holding it at arm's length and by the extreme tip of the corners to indicate that I had no designs upon stealing it, is what it means. But everyone nearby, including the woman, suspected me just the same. "Hot," said the conductor to familiar faces. "Some weather is hot, hot, hot. Is it hot enough for you? Is it hot enough? Is it?" My commutation ticket came back to me with a dark stain from his hand. that anyone should care in this heat, whose flushed lips he kissed, whose head made damp the pajama pocket over his heart. Through the hall of the Buchanan's house blew a faint wind, a very nice cooling wind, carrying the sound of the telephone bell out to Gatsby and me as we waited at the door. "The master's body," roared the butler into the mouthpiece. "I'm sorry, madam, but we can't furnish it. It's far too hot to touch this afternoon." What he really said was, "Yes, yes, I'll see." He set down the receiver and came towards us, glistening slightly, because he's sweaty. To take our stiff straw hats. "Madame expects you in the salon," he cried, needlessly indicating the direction. In this heat, every extra gesture was an affront to the common store of life. The room shadowed well with awnings, and was dark and cool. Daisy and Jordan lay upon an enormous couch like silver idols, weighing down their own white dresses against the singing breeze of the fans. "We can't move," they said together. Jordan's fingers, powdered white over their tan, rested for a moment in mine. "And Mr. Thomas Buchanan, the athlete?" I inquired. Simultaneously, I heard his voice, gruff, muffled, husky, at the hall telephone. Gatsby stood in the center of the crimson carpet and gazed around with fascinated eyes. Daisy watched him and laughed, her sweet, exciting laugh. A tiny gust of powder rose from her bosom into the air. "The rumor is," whispered Jordan, "that that's Tom's girl on the telephone." We were silent. The voice in the hall rose high with annoyance. "Very well, then, I won't sell you the car at all. I'm under no obligations to you at all, and as for your bothering me about it at lunchtime, I won't stand for it at all." "Holding down the receiver," said Daisy cynically. "No, he's not," I assured her. "It's a bona fide deal. I happen to know about it." Tom flung open the door, blocked out its space for a moment with his thick body, and hurried into the room. "Ah, Mr. Gatsby!" He put out his broad, flat hand with well-concealed dislike. "I'm glad to see you, sir." "Nick." "Make us a cold drink," cried Daisy. As he left the room again, she got up and went over to Gatsby and pulled his face down, kissing him on the mouth. Right next door to her husband. "You know I love you," she muttered. You forget there's a lady present," said Jordan. Daisy looked around doubtfully. "Will you kiss Nick too?" "Ugh, what a low, vulgar girl, dirty girl." "I don't care," cried Daisy, and she began to clog on the brick fireplace. Then she remembered the heat and sat down guiltily on the couch, just as a freshly laundered nurse leading a little girl came into the room. "Blessed precious," she crooned, holding her arms out. "Come to your own mother that loves you." The child, relinquished by the nurse, or let go of the nurse's hand, rushed across the room and rooted shyly into her mother's dress. "The blessed precious, did mother get powder on your old yellowy hair? Stand up now and say howdy do." Gatsby and I, in turn, leaned down and took the small, reluctant hand. Afterward, he kept looking at the child with surprise. I don't think he had hardly ever really believed in its existence before. So this is kind of okay, you know how the shirts were a reality check for Daisy? The child is kind of a reality check for Gatsby. So I think Daisy told him about Pammy, or the daughter, but I don't think he really took it seriously, because again, remember, this guy lives in a fantasy world. So, but this is real. So you can't fake this, all right? So, before "I got dressed before luncheon," said the child, turning eagerly to Daisy. "Oh, well, that's because your mother wanted to show you off." Her face bent into a single wrinkle of the small white neck. "You dream, you absolute little dream." "Yay," admitted the child calmly. "And Jordan's got on a white dress, too." How do you like mother's friends?" Daisy turned her around so that she faced Gatsby. "Do you think they're pretty?" "Well, steady." "She doesn't look like her father," explained Daisy. "She looks like me. She's got my hair and shape of the face." Daisy sat back on the couch. The nurse took a step forward and held out her hand. "Come, Pammy." "Goodbye, sweetheart." With a reluctant backward glance, the well-disciplined child held to her nurse's hands and was pulled out of the door. Just as Tom came back, preceding 4 gin rickeys that clinked full of ice, Gatsby took up his drink. He had to take a shot, all right, after all that. "Well, they certainly look cool," he said with visual tension. We drank in long, greedy swallows. "I read somewhere that the sun's getting hotter every year," said Tom genially. "It seems that pretty soon the Earth's gonna fall into the sun. Or, wait a minute, is it just the opposite? The sun's getting colder every year." "Come, outside," Come outside, he suggested to Gatsby. I'd like you to have a look at the place. I went with them out into the veranda. On the green sound, stagnant in the heat, one small sail crawled slowly toward the fresher sea. Gatsby's eyes followed it momentarily. He raised his hand and pointed across the bay. I'm right across from you. So you are? Our eyes lifted over the rose beds and the hot lawn and the weedy refuse of the dog days along shore. Slowly the white wings of the boat moved against the blue, cool limit of the sky. Ahead lay the scalloped ocean and the abounding blessed isles. There's sport for you, said Tom, nodding. I'd like to be out there with him for about an hour. We had luncheon in the dining room, darkening too against the heat, and drank down nervous gaiety with the cold ale. What do we do with ourselves this afternoon? Cried Daisy. And the day after that, and the next 30 years. Ugh, don't be morbid, Jordan said. Life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall. Oh, but it's so hot, insisted Daisy on the verge of tears, and everything's so confused. Let's go to town. Her voice struggled on through the heat, beating against it, molding its senseless into forms. I've heard of making a garage out of a stable, Tom was saying to Gatsby, but I'm the first man who ever made a stable out of a garage. Who wants to go to town? Demanded Daisy insistently. Gatsby's eyes floated toward her. Ah, she cried. You look so cool. Their eyes met, and they just stared at each other, alone in space. With an effort, she glanced down at the table. You always look so cool, she repeated. She had told him that she loved him, and Tom Buchanan saw. So with her eyes, in other words. Okay? So what I believe was about to happen is Daisy's really nervous. Okay? Oh. So Daisy's really nervous. And she is about to, and she's like totally rethinking going and telling Tom that she's going to leave him. Okay? So that's why she's like, let's go to town. Okay, let's get out of here. It's too hot. Okay, I think that's an excuse. And basically, she looks over at Gatsby, and they just make that eye contact. Okay, and they tell each other, it gives her confidence, and she realizes you always look so cool and calm and put together. I can be cool and calm and put together. So they're about to probably confess that that she's leaving Tom, and Tom's about to intervene, and he sees with the eye contact, he's like, oh no, you are not about to be making that kind of eye contact with my woman. So here we go. You always look so cool. She had told him that she loved him, and Tom Buchanan saw. He was astounded. His mouth opened a little, and he looked at Gatsby, and then back at Daisy, as if he had just recognized her as someone he knew a long time ago. You resemble the advertisement of the man, she went on innocently. You know, the advertisement of the man. All right, broke in Tom quickly. I'm perfectly willing to go to town. Come on, we're all going to town. He got up, his eyes still flashing between Gatsby and his wife. No one moved. Come on! His temper cracked a little. What's the matter anyhow? If we're going to town, let's start. His hand, trembling with his effort at self-control, bore to his lips the last of his glass of ale. Daisy's voice got us to our feet and out to the blazing gravel drive. Are we just gonna go? She objected. Like this? Aren't we gonna let anyone smoke a cigarette first? Everybody smoked all through lunch. Oh, let's have fun, she begged him. It's so hot to fuss. He didn't answer. Have it your way, she said. Come on, Jordan. And they went upstairs to get ready while we three men stood there shuffling the hot pebbles with our feet. A silver curve of the moon hovered already in the western sky. Gatsby started to speak, changed his mind, but not before Tom wheeled and faced him expectantly. Have you got your stables here? Asked Gatsby with an effort. About a quarter of a mile down the road. Oh. A pause. I don't see the idea of going to town, broke out Tom savagely. Women get these notions in their head. Shall we take anything to drink? Called Daisy from an upper window. I'll get some whiskey, answered Tom. He went inside. Gatsby turned to me rigidly. I can't say anything in his household, sport. She's got an indiscreet voice, I remarked. It's full of... I hesitated. Her voice is full of money, he said suddenly. Ah! Light bulb for Nick. That was it. Because he was always obsessed with her voice, but he never knew exactly what it sounded like. This is what it sounded like. Her voice was full of money. That was it. I'd never understood it before. It was full of money. That was the inexhaustible charm that rose and fell in it, the jingle of it, the symbol's song of it. High in a white palace, the king's daughter, the golden girl. Well, Tom came out of the house wrapping a quart bottle in a towel, followed by Daisy and Jordan wearing small, tight hats of metallic cloth and carrying light capes over their arms. "Shall we all go in my car?" suggested Gatsby. He felt the hot green leather of the seat. I ought to have left it in the shade." "Is it a standard shift?" demanded Tom. "Yes." "Well, you take my coupe and let me drive your car to town." The suggestion was distasteful to Gatsby. "I don't think there's much gas," he objected. "Plenty of gas," said Tom boisterously. He looked at the gauge. "And if it runs out, I can stop at a drugstore." "You can buy anything at a drugstore nowadays." That was a hit at Gatsby, by the way. He'll get into it later on, but that was totally a purposeful hit. A pause, followed by this apparently pointless remark. Pointless to Nick anyways at this point. Daisy looked at Tom, frowning. An indefinable expression at once, definitely, unfamiliar and vaguely recognizable, as if I had only heard it described in words, passed over Gatsby's face. "Come on, Daisy," said Tom, pressing her with his hand towards Gatsby's car. "I'll take you in this circus wagon." He opened the door, but she moved out from the circle of his arm. "You take Nick and Jordan. We'll follow you in the coupe." She walked close to Daisy, touching his coat with her hand. Jordan and Tom and I got into the front seat of Gatsby's car. So Tom is driving Gatsby's car. Tom pushed the unfamiliar gears tentatively, and we shot off into the oppressive heat, leaving them out of sight behind. So they're driving. So Tom is driving Gatsby's car, and Gatsby's driving Tom's car. All right. Remember, Gatsby's car is yellow. Tom's car is blue. Okay. So, and this is the conversation that Tom is having in the car with Nick and Jordan. "Did you see that?" demanded Tom. "See what?" He looked at me keenly, realizing that Jordan and I must have known all along. "You think I'm pretty dumb, don't you?" he suggested. "Perhaps I am, but I have almost a second sight sometimes that tells me what to do. Maybe you don't believe that, but science—" He paused. The immediate contingency overtook him, pulled him back from the edge of the theoretical abyss. "I've made a small investigation of this fella," he continued. "I could have gone deeper if I'd known." "Do you mean you've been to a medium or a psychic?" inquired Jordan humorously. "What?" Confused, he stared at us as we laughed. "A medium?" "About Gatsby." "About Gatsby? No, I haven't. I said I've been making a small investigation of his past." "And you found he was an Oxford man," said Jordan helpfully. "An Oxford man?" He was incredulous. "Like hell he is. He wears a pink suit." "Nevertheless, he's an Oxford man." "Oxford, New Mexico," snorted Tom contemptuously, "or something like that." "Listen, Tom, if you're such a snob, why did you invite him to lunch?" demanded Jordan crossly. "Daisy invited him. She knew him before we were married, God knows where." We were all irritable now with the fading ale, and aware of it we drove for a while in silence. Then, as Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's faded eyes came into sight down the road, I remembered Gatsby's caution about gasoline. "We've got enough to get us to town," said Tom. "But there's a garage right here," objected Jordan. "I don't want to get stalled in this baking heat." Tom threw on both brakes impatiently, and we slid to an abrupt, dusty spot under Wilson's sign. After a moment, the proprietor, the owner, emerged from the interior of his establishment and gazed hollow-eyed at the car. "Well, let's have some gas!" cried Tom roughly. "What do you think we stopped for, to admire the view?" "I'm sick," said Wilson without moving. "Been sick all day." "What's the matter?" "I'm all run down." "Well, shall I help myself?" Tom demanded. "You sounded well enough on the phone." With an effort, Wilson left the shade in support of the doorway, and breathing hard, unscrewed the cap of the tank. In the sunlight, his face was green. I didn't mean to interrupt your lunch," he said, "but I needed money pretty bad. I was wondering what you were going to do with your old car." "How do you like this one?" inquired Tom. "I bought it last week." "It's a nice yellow one," said Wilson as he strained at the handle. "Like to buy it?" "Big chance." Wilson smiled faintly. "No, but I could make some money on the other." "What do you want money for all of a sudden?" "I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go west." "Your wife does?" explained Tom, startled. "She's been talking about it for 10 years. He rested for a moment against the pump, shading his eyes. "And now she's going whether she wants to or not. I'm gonna get her away." The coupe flashed by us, or Gatsby and Daisy in the blue car flashed by us with a flurry of dust and a splash of a waving hand. "What do I owe you?" demanded Tom harshly. So here's a monumental thing. This is Wilson. I just got wised up to something funny the last 2 days, remarked Wilson. That's why I can't get her. I I want to get away. That's why I've been bothering you about the car. What do I owe you? $1.20. The relentless beating heat was beginning to confuse me, and I had a bad moment there before I realized that so far his suspicions hadn't alighted on Tom. All right, so Wilson knows now. Now he's been wised up. Okay? Wilson now knows that Myrtle's been cheating on him. But as Nick points out, Wilson does not know that it's with Tom. He just knows that Myrtle has been cheating. He doesn't know with whom, but he knows. He had discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock had made him physically sick. I stared at him, and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men in intelligence or race so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. Wilson was so sick that he looked guilty, unforgivably guilty, as if he had just got some poor girl knocked up with child. I'll let you have that car, said Tom. I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon. The locality was always vaguely disquieting, even in the broad glare of afternoon, and now I turned my head as though I had been warned of something behind. Over the ash heaps, the giant eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg kept their vigil, but I perceived after a moment that some other eyes were regarding or looking at us with peculiar intensity from less than 20 feet away. You see, in one of the windows over the garage, the curtains had been moved aside a little, and Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. So engrossed was she that she had no consciousness of being observed, and one emotion after another crept into her face like objects into a slowly developing picture. Her expression was curiously familiar. It was an expression I'd often seen on women's faces, but on Myrtle Wilson's face, it seemed purposeless and inexplicable, until I realized that her eyes, wide with jealous terror, were fixed not on Tom, but on Jordan Baker, whom she took, or mistakenly took, to be his wife. Well, there's no confusion like the confusion of a simple mind, and as we drove away, Tom was feeling the hot whips of panic. His wife and his mistress, until an hour ago, were secure, safe, and inviolate, were now slipping precipitously from his control. He was losing all control. All the women in his life are leaving him. Instinct made him step on the accelerator with double purpose of overtaking Daisy and leaving Wilson behind, and we sped along toward Astoria at 50 miles an hour, until among the spidery girders of the elevated we came in sight of the easy-going blue coupe. Those big movies around 50th Street are cool, or air-conditioned, suggested Jordan. I love New York on summer afternoons when everyone's away. There's something very sensuous about it, overripe as if all sorts of funny fruits were going to fall into your hands. The word sensuous had the effect of further disquieting Tom, but before he could invent a protest, the coupe came to a stop, and Daisy signaled for us to draw up alongside. "Where are we going?" she cried. "How about the movies?" "Ugh, it's so hot," she complained. "You go. We'll ride around and meet you after." With an effort, her wit rose faintly. "We'll meet you on some corner. I'll be the man smoking 2 cigarettes." "We can't argue about it here," Tom said impatiently as the truck gave out a cursing whistle behind us. "You follow me to the south side of Central Park in front of the plaza." Several times he turned his head and looked back for their car, and if the traffic delayed them, he slowed up until they came into sight. I think he was afraid that they would dart down a side street and out of his life forever. But they didn't, and we all took to the less explicable step of engaging the parlor of a suite in the Plaza Hotel. Okay, I'm going to show you the Plaza Hotel. All right, and I'm going to show you how much it costs to rent, not to rent, but to secure a room for the night. Okay, so they're heading to the Plaza Hotel. Now, of course, this is, the Plaza Hotel now in New York. It's still there. Oh, wait, oops, I didn't mean to do that. So this is what it looks like, okay, on the outside. So beautiful, big. Here's some rooms and suites. So this is a hotel. Okay, so it comes complete with a room, or a living room area. All right, has guest bedrooms. Here we go, dining rooms, sitting rooms, all that. So let's see, learn more. 24 karat. So here we go with the beds. Nice. And do you know what you can what you have to pay? A very low price of 45,000 per night. That's all. Okay. So that's more than my paycheck, my year paycheck. So Miss Roberts will not be staying at the Plaza Hotel anytime soon. So yes. Okay. Let's continue on, shall we? No. Right here, right here. 126. The prolonged and tumultuous argument that ended by herding us into that room eludes me, though I have a sharp physical memory that, in the course of it, my underwear kept climbing like a damp snake around my legs, and intermittent beads of sweat raced cool across my back. I hate when that happens. The notion originated with Daisy's suggestion that we hire 5 bathrooms and take cold baths, and then assume more tangible form of a place to have a mint julep, which is a type of drink. Each of us said over and over that it was a crazy idea. We all talked at once to a baffled clerk and thought or pretended to think that we were being very funny. The room was large and stifling, so still really hot. And though it was already 4 o'clock, opening the windows admitted only a gust of hot shrubbery from the park. Daisy went to the mirror and stood with her back to us, fixing her hair. "It's a swell suite," whispered Jordan respectfully, and everyone laughed. "Open another window," commanded Daisy without turning round. "There aren't any more." "Well, we'd better telephone for an axe." The thing to do is to forget about the heat," said Tom impatiently. "You make it 10 times worth by crabbing about it." He unrolled the bottle of whiskey from the towel and put it on the table. "Why not let her alone, old sport? Leave her alone, old sport," remarked Gatsby. "You're the one who wanted to come to town." Ooh, there was a moment of silence. The telephone book slipped from its nail and splashed to the floor, whereupon Jordan whispered, "Excuse me." But this time no one laughed. "I'll pick it up," I offered. "I've got it." Gatsby examined the parted string, muttered, in an interested way, and tossed the book on a chair. "That's a great expression of yours, isn't it?" said Tom sharply. "What is? All this old sport business? Where'd you pick that up?" "Now see here, Tom," said Daisy, turning around from the mirror. "If you're going to make personal remarks, I won't stay here a minute. Call up and order some ice for the mint julep." As Tom took up the receiver, the compressed heat exploded into sound, and we were listening to the portentous chords of Mendelssohn's Wedding March from the ballroom below. "Oh, imagine marrying anybody in this heat," cried Jordan dismally. "Still, I was married in the middle of June," Daisy remembered. "Louisville in June. Somebody fainted. Who was it fainted, Tom?" "Biloxi," he answered shortly. "Ah, a man named Biloxi, Biloxi, and he made boxes. That's a fact. And he was from Biloxi, Mississippi. They carried him into my house," appended Jordan, "because we lived just 2 doors from the church, and he stayed 3 weeks until Daddy told him he had to get out. The day after he left, Daddy died." After a moment, she had added, as if it might have sounded irreverent, "There wasn't any connection." "I used to know a Bill Biloxi from Memphis," I remarked. That was his cousin. I knew his whole family history before he left. That was his cousin. I knew his whole family history before he left. He gave me an aluminum putter that I use still today." The music had died down as the ceremony began, and now a long cheer floated at the window, followed by intermittent cries of "Yeah, yeah, yeah," and finally by a burst of jazz as the dancing began. "Oh, we're all getting old," said Daisy. "If we were young, we'd rise and dance." "Remember Biloxi?" Jordan warned her. "Where'd you know him, Tom?" "Biloxi?" He concentrated with an effort. "I didn't know him. He was a friend of Daisy's." "He was not," she denied. "I'd never seen him before. He came down in the private car." "Well, he said he knew you. He said he was raised in Louisville. Asa Bird bought him around at the last minute and asked if we had room for him." Jordan smiled. "He was probably bumming his way home. He told me he was a president of your class at Yale." Tom and I looked at each other blankly. "Biloxi? First place, we didn't have any president." Gatsby's foot beat a short, restless tattoo, and Tom eyed him suddenly. So Gatsby's just nervously tapping, and this is where Tom, he kind of like looked side eyes him, and he's like, "What you nervous about, bud?" "By the way, Mr. Gatsby, I understand you're an Oxford man." Here's the truth. "Well, not exactly." "Oh yeah, I understood you went to Oxford." "Well, yes, I went there." A pause, then Tom's voice incredulous and insulting. "Well, you must have gone there about the time Biloxi went to New Haven." Another pause. A waiter. knocked and came in with crushed mint and ice, but the silence was unbroken by his thank you and the soft closing of the door. This tremendous detail was to be cleared up at last. Well, I told you I went there, said Gatsby. I heard you, but I'd like to know when. Well, it was 1919. I only stayed 5 months. That's why I can't really call myself an Oxford man. Tom glanced around to see if we mirrored his unbelief, but we were all looking at Gatsby. It was an opportunity they gave to some of the officers after the armistice, or after the peace of World War I. He continued, we could go to any of the universities in England or France. I wanted to get up and slap him on the back. I had one of those renewals of complete faith in him that I had experienced before. Daisy rose smiling faintly and went to the table. Open the whiskey, Tom, she ordered, and I'll make you a mint julep. Then you won't seem so stupid to yourself. Look at the mint. Wait a minute, snapped Tom. I want to ask Mr. Gatsby one more question. We'll go on. Here he comes. What kind of a row are you trying to cause in my house anyhow? They were finally out in the open at last, and Gatsby was content. He isn't causing a row. Daisy looked desperately from one to the other. You're causing a row. Please, have a little self-control. Self-control? Repeated Tom encouragingly. I suppose the latest thing to do is sit back while you let Mr. Nobody from Nowhere make love to your wife. Well, that's the idea. You can count me out. Nowadays, people begin by sneering at family life and family institutions, and next they'll throw everything overboard and have intermarriage between black and white. Flushed and with his impassioned gibberish, he saw himself standing alone on the last barrier of civilization. We're all white here, murmured Jordan. I know I'm not very popular. I don't have big parties. I suppose you've got to make your house into a pigsty in order to have any friends in this modern world. Angry as I was, as we all were, I was tempted to laugh whenever he opened his mouth. The transition from libertine to prig was so complete. I've got something to tell you, old sport, began Daisy, but Daisy guessed at his attention. So Gatsby's about to, spill the beans, okay, but she says, look at this. Daisy says, please don't. She interrupted helplessly. Please, let's all just go home. Why don't we all just go home? That's a good idea. That's a good idea. Come on, Tom. Nobody wants a drink. I want to know what Mr. Gatsby has to tell me. Your wife doesn't love you, said Gatsby. She never loved you. She loves me. Ha! You must be crazy, exclaimed Tom automatically. Gatsby sprang to his feet, vivid with excitement. Well, she never loved you, did you hear? He cried. She only married you because I was poor, and she was tired of waiting for me. It was a terrible mistake, but in her heart, she never loved anyone except me. At this point, Jordan and I tried to go, but Tom and Gatsby insisted with competitive firmness that we remain, as though neither of them had anything to conceal and hide, and it would be a privilege to partake vicariously of their emotions. Sit down, Daisy! Tom's voice groped unsuccessfully for the paternal tone. What's been going on? I want to hear all about it. I told you what's been going on, said Gatsby. Going on for 5 years and you didn't know. Tom turned to Daisy sharply. You've been seeing this fella for 5 years? Well, not seeing, said Gatsby. No, we couldn't meet, but both of us loved each other all that time, old sport, and you didn't know. I used to laugh sometimes, but there was no laughter in his eyes. To think that you didn't know. Ah, is that all? Tom tapped his thick fingers together like a clergyman and leaned back in his chair. You're crazy, he exploded. I can't speak about what happened 5 years ago because I didn't know Daisy then, and I'll be damned if I see how you got within miles of her unless you brought the groceries to the back door. But all the rest of that's a goddamn lie. Daisy loved me when she married me, and she loves me now. No, said Gatsby, shaking his head. She does, though. The trouble is that sometimes she gets foolish ideas into her head and doesn't know what she's doing. He nodded sagely. And, what's more, I love Daisy, too. Yeah, once in a while I go off on a spree and I make a fool of myself, but I always come back, and in my heart I love her all the time. Oh, you're revolting, said Daisy. She turned to me, and her voice dropped an octave lower, filling the room with thrilling scorn. Do you know why we left Chicago? I'm surprised that they didn't treat you to that story of that little spree. Gatsby walked over and stood beside her. Daisy, shh, it's okay, that's all over now, he said earnestly. It doesn't matter anymore. Just tell him the truth, that you never loved him, and it's all wiped out forever. She looked at him blindly. Why, how could I love him, possibly? You never loved him, She hesitated. Okay, can't hesitate if it's the truth. Her eyes fell on Jordan and me with a sort of appeal, a begging, as though she realized at last what she was doing, as though she had never, all along, intended doing anything at all. But it was done now. It was too late. I never loved him, she said with perceptible reluctance. Here comes Tom. Manipulation. Not a Capellini? Demanded Tom suddenly. No. From the ballroom beneath, muffled and suffocating chords were drifting on the hot waves of the air. Not that day I carried you down from the punch bowl to keep your shoes dry? There was a husky tenderness in his tone. Baby, Daisy. Please don't. Her voice was cold, but the rancor was gone from it. She looked at Gatsby. There, Jay, she said, but her hand as she tried to light a cigarette was trembling. Suddenly, she just threw the cigarette and the burning match on the carpet. Oh, you want too much, she cried to Gatsby. I love you now. Isn't that enough? I can't help what's past. She began to sob helplessly. I did love him once, but I loved you too. Gatsby's eyes opened and closed. You love me too, he repeated. Even that's a lie, said Tom savagely. She didn't know that you were alive. Why, there are things between Daisy and me that you'll never know. Things that neither of us can ever forget. Well, these words seemed to bite physically into Gatsby. I want to speak to Daisy alone, he insisted. She's all excited now. Even alone, I can't say I never loved Tom, she admitted in a pitiful voice. It wouldn't be true. Of course it wouldn't, agreed Tom. She turned to her husband. As if it mattered to you, she said. Of course it matters. I'm going to take better care of you from now on. You don't understand, said Gatsby with a touch of panic. You're not going to take care of her anymore. I'm not? Tom opened his eyes wide and laughed. He could afford to control himself now. Why's that? Daisy's leaving you. Ha! Nonsense. I am, though, she said with a visible effort. She's not leaving me. Tom's words suddenly leaned over Gatsby. Certainly not for a common swindler who'd have to steal the ring to put on her finger. I won't stand for this, cried Daisy. Oh, please, let's just get out. Who are you, anyhow? Broke out Tom. You're one of that bunch that hangs around with Meyer Wolfsheim. That much I happen to know. I've made a little investigation into your affairs, and I'll carry it further tomorrow. You can suit yourself about that, old sport, said Gatsby steadily. I found out what your drugstores were. He turned to us and spoke rapidly. So here's the truth about how Gatsby made his millions. He and this Wolfsheim bought up a lot of side street drugstores here and in Chicago and sold grain alcohol over the counter. That's one of his little stunts. I picked him for a bootlegger the first time I saw him, and I wasn't far wrong. What about it? Said Gatsby politely. I guess your friend Walter Chase wasn't too proud to come in on it. And you left him in the lurch, didn't you? You let him go to jail for a month over in New Jersey. God, you ought to hear Walter on the subject of you. He came to us dead broke. He was very glad to pick up some money, old sport. Don't you call me old sport, cried Tom. Gatsby said nothing. Walter would have you up on the betting laws too, but Wolfsheim scared him into shutting his mouth. That unfamiliar yet recognizable look was back in Gatsby's face. That drugstore business was just small change, continued Tom slowly. But you've got something on now Walter's afraid to even tell me about. I glanced at Daisy, who was staring terrified between Gatsby and her husband, and at Jordan, who had begun to balance an invisible but absorbing object on the tip of her chin. Then I turned back to Gatsby and was startled at his expression. He looked, and this is said in all contempt for the babbled slander of his garden, as if he had killed a man. For a moment, the set of his face could be described in just that fantastic way. But it passed, and he began to talk excitedly to Daisy, denying everything, defending his name against the accusations that had not been made. But with every word, she was drawing further and further into herself, away from him, in other words. So he just gave that up, and only the dead dream fought on as the afternoon slipped away, trying to touch what was no longer tangible, struggling unhappily, undespairingly toward that lost voice across the room. The voice begged again to go. Please, Tom, I can't stand this anymore. Her frightened eyes told that whatever intentions, whatever courage she had were definitely gone. You do start on home, Daisy, said Tom, in Mr. Gatsby's car. She looked at Tom, alarmed now, but he insisted with magnanimous scorn. Go on, he won't annoy you. I think he realizes his presumptuous little flirtation is over. And they were gone, without a word, snapped out, made accidental, isolated like ghosts, even from our pity. All right, I'm going to pause. I'm going to show you the video clip, okay? And then I'm going to talk about what kind of just happened here. All right, so let me pause.
Mr. Gatsby, exactly who are you anyhow? You see, I have made a small investigation into your affairs. You're one of my Wolfshine's bunch.
Please, let's go home.
See, he and this Wolfshine, they bought up a lot of drugstores and sold bootlegged alcohol over the counter.
What about it, old sport?
Don't you call me old sport. And this drugstore business is just small change compared to this bond stunt that you and Wolfshine have got going on.
Your friend Walter Chase isn't too proud to come in on
Oh, I've been giving that some thought. How does a reputable banker like Walter Chase find himself up to his eyeballs in debt
Tell you how.
to a little kite like Wolfshine?
It's called greed, old sport.
That's right. And you have half of Wall Street out there swilling your free booze at that fun park every weekend. I'm surprised he hasn't tried to drag you in.
He has.
My God, he has.
He's got nothing to do
With your little racket. Daisy. Daisy. Can't you see who this guy is? With his house, and his parties, and his fancy clothes. Here's just the front for Wolfshine, gangster, to get his claws into respectable folk like Walter Chase.
The only respectable thing about you, old sport, is your money. Your money, that's it. I have just as much as you. That means we're equal.
Oh, no. We're different. I am, they are, she is. We're all different from you. You see, we were born different. Still have blood. Feel nothing that's
Look at this.
Say a steal.
See, I'm angry.
Let's dream up. Never take that. Girl like this. Oh, you shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
Ooh.
Gatsby looked in that moment as if he had killed a man.
Look at the fear in Daisy's eyes. Ooh, even Jordan's like, whoa.
My sincerest apologies.
There it is. It's broken. She can't.
Lost my temper.
She doesn't want this.
That's right, Mr. Gatsby.
Yeah. So Daisy doesn't want to have anything to do with that. She does not want to be a gangster's wife. She doesn't want that kind of lifestyle. That's not how she was brought up. She comes from money, and she's been well educated. She's been, she knows etiquette. She knows how to act in public and stuff like that. And that freaks. I mean, all that plus the explosion that Gatsby just did. That she's like no, and so she's not gonna want to run away with him anymore. Just she's done, and she wants to call it off, and that's why Tom is like, yeah, you can leave because she's not gonna run away with you. Okay, she loves me, and she wants my life, not your life. So just take her home, and I'll be by later. Woo! All right, so let's continue. Okay, slight wardrobe change, but we're good. Okay, so we're gonna continue on this, but I'm gonna hide my toolbar. All right, I'm gonna start here. All right, with after. After a moment, Tom got up and began wrapping the unopened bottle of whiskey in the towel. Want any of this stuff, Jordan? Nick? I didn't answer. Nick? He asked again. What? Want any? No. And then this is what Nick says. I just remembered that today's my birthday. Who forgets their birthday? I was 30. Before me stretched the portentous, menacing road of a new decade. It was 7 o'clock when we got into the coupe with him and started for Long Island. Tom talked incessantly, exulting and laughing, but his voice was as remote from Jordan and me as the foreign clamor on the sidewalk or the tumult of the elevated overhead. Human sympathy has its limits, and we were content to let all their tragic arguments fade with the entire city lights behind. 30. The promise of a decade of loneliness, a thinning list of single men to know, a thinning briefcase of enthusiasm, thinning hair. But there was Jordan beside me, who, unlike Daisy, was too wise ever to carry well-forgotten dreams from age to age. As we passed over the dark bridge, her wan face fell lazily against my coat's shoulder, and the formidable stroke of 30 died away with the reassuring pressure of her hand. So we drove on toward death through the cooling twilight. Okay, so just this kind of like a little slight midlife crisis. Um, Nick is no longer 29. So he's no longer in his 20s. He's officially an adult. And has he done, he's kind of having that moment of realization. Have I done much with my life? I mean, I'm not even like 100% into my career. I don't have a wife. I don't have any children. So what have I done with my life? And then he looks at this beautiful girl and he's just like, nah, well, here we go. Here's to 30. Mazel tov. No. All right. The young Greek. Okay, so Um, this little part here, all right, is a technical. This is not I don't know who is narrating this. Honestly, this is an omniscient. Third, it's a third person omniscient narrator right here from the young Greek all the way to Long. Okay, so this is not Nick narrating. All right, so the young Greek Michelaus, who ran the coffee joint beside the ash heaps, was the principal witness at the inquest. We're back in the Valley of Ashes, by the way. He'd slept through the heat until after 5, when he strolled over to the garage and found George Wilson sick in his office, really sick, pale as his own pale hair and shaking all over. Michelaus advised him to go to bed, but Wilson refused, saying that he'd miss a lot of business if he did. While his neighbor was trying to persuade him, a violent racket broke out overhead, so she just starts banging. Michelaus is like, what's that? And so Wilson says, I got my little wife locked up in there, explained Wilson calmly. She's gonna stay there till the day after tomorrow, and then we're going to move away. Michelaus was astonished. They had been neighbors for 4 years, and Wilson had never seemed faintly capable of such a statement, because he knew Wilson was a little bit of a pansy and a pushover. Generally, he was one of these worn-out men. When he wasn't working, he sat on a chair in the doorway and stared at the people in the cars that passed along the road. When anyone spoke to him, he invariably laughed in an agreeable, colorless way. He was his wife's man, and not his own. So naturally, Michelaus tried to find out what had happened, but Wilson wouldn't say a word. Instead, he began to throw curious, suspicious glances at his visitor, and asked him what he'd been doing at certain times on certain days. Just as the latter was getting a little uneasy, some workmen passed the door bound for his restaurant, and Michelaus took the opportunity to get away, intending to come back later, but he didn't. He supposed he forgot to, that's all. When he came outside again, a little after 7, he was reminded of the conversation because he heard Mrs. Wilson's voice, loud and scolding, downstairs in the garage. Beat me! He heard her cry. Throw me down and beat me, you dirty little coward! A moment later, she rushed out of the dusk, waving her hands and shouting before he could move from his door. The business was over. The death car, as the newspapers call it, didn't stop. It came out of the gathering darkness, wavered tragically for a moment, and then disappeared around the next bend. Michelaus wasn't even sure of its color. He told the first policeman that it was light green. The other car, the one going toward New York, came to a rest 100 yards beyond, and its driver hurried back to where Myrtle Wilson, her life violently extinguished, knelt in the road and mingled her thick, dark blood with the dust. Michelaus and this man reached her first, but when they had torn open her shirtwaist, still damp with perspiration, they saw that her left breast was swinging loose like a flap, and there was no need to listen for the heart beneath. The mouth was wide open and ripped at the corners, as though she had choked a little in giving up that tremendous vitality she had stored for so long. So in case you didn't quite grasp what just happened, let me show you.
Today's my birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
30. The promise of a decade of loneliness. The formidable stroke of 30 died away as Gatsby and Daisy drove on through the cooling twilight towards death.
Don't you lie to me! Hey, where'd you get these from? You might fool me, but you don't fool God! God sees everything! Ah! Motto!
Here's the worst part. So that was an accident. But this is where it becomes criminal. He drives away. That guy's like, no, he didn't. Alright, that's where we're going to pick up here. Alright. Okay. So, now this is where we're picking up, where the others, where we just pulled up. We saw the 3 or 4 automobiles and the crowd when we were still some distance away. It's a wreck, said Tom. That's good. Wilson will have a little business at last. He slowed down, but still without any intention of stopping, until as we came nearer, the hushed, intent faces of the people at the garage door made him automatically put on the brakes. We'll take a look, he said doubtfully. Just a look. I became aware now of a hollow wailing sound which issued incessantly from the garage, a sound which, as we got out of the coupe and walked toward the door, resolved itself into the words, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" uttered over and over in a gasping moan. "Oh, there's some bad trouble here," said Tom excitedly. He reached up on tiptoes and peered over a circle of heads into the garage, which was lit only by a yellow light and a swinging wire basket overhead. Then he made a harsh sound in his throat, kind of like a choking. With a violent thrusting movement of his powerful arms, pushed his way through. It's because he saw Myrtle's body. The circle closed up again with a running murmur of expostulation. It was a minute before I could see anything at all. Then new arrivals deranged the line, and Jordan and I were pushed suddenly inside. Myrtle Wilson's body, wrapped in a blanket and then in another blanket as though she suffered from a chill in the hot night, lay on a work table by the wall, and Tom, with his back to us, was bending over it, motionless. Next to him stood a motorcycle policeman, taking down names with much sweat and correction in a little book. At first I couldn't find the source of the high groaning word that echoed clamorously through the bare garage, and then I saw Wilson, standing on the raised threshold of his office, swaying back and forth and holding to the doorpost with his hands. Some man was talking to him in a low voice and attempting from time to time to lay a hand on his shoulder, but Wilson neither heard nor saw. His eyes would drop slowly from the swinging light to the laden table by the wall, and then jerk back to the light again, and he gave out this his high, horrible call. "Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God!" Presently, Tom lifted his head with a jerk, and after staring around the garage with glazed eyes, addressed a mumbled, incoherent remark to the police officer. "M-A-V," the policeman was saying. "Oh, no, no, R," corrected the man. "M-A-V-R-O. Listen to me, listen to me, listen to me," muttered Tom fiercely. "R," said the policeman. "O, G, G." He looked up at Tom's broad hand, as Tom's broad hand fell sharply on his shoulder. "What do you want, fella?" "What happened? That's what I want to know." "Otto hit her. Instantly killed." "Instantly killed," repeated Tom, staring. "She ran out in the road. Son of a bitch didn't even stop his car." There were 2 cars," said Michaelis. "One coming and one going, see?" "Going where?" asked the policeman keenly. One going each way. Well, his hand rose toward the blankets but stopped halfway and fell to his side. She ran out there, and the one coming from New York knocked right into her going 30 or 40 miles an hour. And what's the name of this place here? Demanded the officer. Hasn't got a name. A pale, well-dressed Negro stepped near. It was a yellow car, he said. Big yellow car, new. See the accident? Asked the policeman. No, but the car passed me going down the road, going faster than 40, going 50, 60. Come here and let's have your name. Look out now, I want to get his name. Some words of this conversation must have reached Wilson, swaying in the office door, for suddenly a new theme found voice among his gasping cries. You don't have to tell me what kind of car it was. I know what kind of car it was. Watching Tom, I saw the wad of muscle back in his shoulder tighten under his coat. He walked quickly over to Wilson and, standing in front of him, seized him firmly by the upper arms. Okay, so this is where basically Tom is going to get scared. Okay, Tom is scared because he thinks, because he pulled up in this yellow car, and Wilson thinks that the car, was being driven by Tom. So Tom's gonna save his own butt really quickly, if you will. Okay, so here we go. So Tom walks up over to Wilson. He's like, "You gotta pull yourself together," he said with soothing gruffness. Wilson's eyes fell upon Tom. He stared up on his tiptoes, and then started up on his tiptoes, and then would have collapsed to his knees had not Tom held him upright. "Listen," said Tom, shaking him a little. "I just got here a few minutes ago from New York. I was bringing you that coupe we've been talking about. That yellow car I was driving this afternoon wasn't even mine, you hear? I haven't seen it all afternoon." Only the Negro and I were near enough to hear what he said, but the policeman caught something in the tone and looked over with truculent eyes. "Oh, what's all of that?" he demanded. "I'm a friend of his." Tom turned his head, but kept his hands firmly on Wilson's body. "He says he knows the car that did it. It was a yellow car." Some dim impulse moved the policeman to look suspiciously at Tom. "And what's the color of your car?" It's a blue car, a coupe." "We've come straight from New York," I said. Someone who'd been driving a little behind us confirmed this, and the policeman turned away. Now if you'll just let me have that name again, correct?" Picking up Wilson like a doll, Tom carried him to the office, set him down in a chair, and came back. "Somebody'll come here and sit with him," he snapped authoritatively. He watched all the two men standing closest glance at each other and went unwillingly into the room. Then Tom shut the door on them and came down the single step, his eyes avoiding the table. As he passed close to me, he whispered, "Let's get out." Self-consciously, with his authoritative arms breaking the way, we pushed through the still gathered crowd, passing a hurried doctor, case in hand, who had been sent for in a wild hope half an hour ago. Tom drove slowly until we were beyond the bend. Then his foot came down hard, and the coupe raced along through the night. In a little while I heard a low, husky sob, and saw that tears were overflowing down his face. "Goddamn coward," he whimpered. "He didn't even stop his car." The Buchanan's house floated suddenly toward us through the dark, rustling trees. Tom stopped beside the porch and looked up at the second floor, where two windows bloomed with light among the vines. "Daisy's home," he said. As we got out of the car, he glanced at me and frowned slightly. "I ought to have dropped you off in West Egg, Nick. There's nothing we could do tonight." A change had come over him, and he spoke gravely and with decision. As we walked across the moonlight gravel to the porch, he disposed of the situation in a few brisk phrases. "I'll telephone for a taxi to take you home, and while you're waiting, you and Jordan better go in the kitchen and have them get you some supper if you want any." He opened the door. "Come in." "No, thanks, but I'd be glad if you ordered me a taxi. I'll wait outside." Jordan put her hand on my arm. "Won't you come in, Nick?" "No, thanks." I was feeling a little sick, and I wanted to be alone, but Jordan lingered for a moment more. "It's only 9:30, she said. I'd be damned if I'd go in. I'd had enough of all of them for one day, and suddenly that included Jordan too. She must have seen something of this in my expression, for she turned abruptly away and ran up the porch steps into the house. I sat down for a few minutes with my head in my hands until I heard the phone taken up inside and the butler's voice calling a taxi. Then I walked slowly down the drive away from the house, intending to wait by the gate. I hadn't gotten 20 yards when I heard my name and Gatsby stepped from between two bushes into the path. I must have felt pretty weird by that time because I could think of nothing except the luminosity of his pink suit under the moon. My husband's making weird noises with the dog. What are you doing? What are you doing? I inquired. Just standing here, old sport. Somehow that seemed a despicable occupation. For all I knew, he was going to rob the house in a moment. I wouldn't have been surprised to see sinister faces, the faces of Wolsheim's people, behind him in the dark shrubbery. Did you see any trouble on the road? He asked after a minute. Yes. He hesitated. Was she killed? Yes. I thought so. I told Daisy I thought so. It's better that the shock should all come at once. She stood it pretty well. He stood as if Daisy's reaction was the only thing that mattered. I got to West Egg by a side road, he went on, and left the car in my garage. I don't think anybody saw us, but of course I can't be sure. I disliked him so much by this time that I didn't find it necessary to tell him he was wrong. Who was the woman? He inquired. Her name was Wilson. Her husband owns the garage. How the devil did it happen? Well, I tried to swing the wheel, he broke off, and suddenly I guessed at the truth. Here's the truth. See, Tom thinks Gatsby was driving. And Nick asks the question, was Daisy driving? Yes, he said after a moment. But of course I'll say I was. You see, when we left New York, she was very nervous, and she thought it would steady her to drive. And this woman, she just rushed out at us just as we were passing a car coming the other way. It all happened in a minute, but it seemed to me that she wanted to speak to us, thought we were somebody or someone she knew. Well, first Daisy turned away from the woman toward the other car, and then she lost her nerve and turned back. The second my hand reached the wheel, I felt the shock. It must have killed her instantly. It ripped her open. Oh, don't tell me, old sport. He winced. Anyhow, Daisy stepped on it. I tried to make her stop, but she wouldn't. She couldn't, so I pulled on the emergency brake. Then she fell over into my lap, and I drove on. She'll be all right tomorrow, though, he said presently. I'm going to wait here and see if he tries to bother her about that unpleasantness this afternoon. She locked herself into her room, and if he tries any brutality, she's going to turn the light out and on again. He won't touch her, I said. He's not thinking about her. I don't trust him, old sport. How long are you going to wait? All night if necessary, anyhow until they all go to bed. A new point of view occurred to me. Suppose Tom found out that Daisy had been driving. He might think he saw a connection in it. He might think anything. I looked at the house. There were 2 or 3 bright windows downstairs, and the pink glow from Daisy's room on the second floor. You wait here, I said. I'll see if there's any sign of a commotion. I walked back along the border of the lawn, traversed the gravel softly, and tiptoed up the veranda steps. The drawing-room curtains were open, and I saw that the room was empty. Crossing the porch where we had dined that June night 3 months before, I came to a small rectangle of light which I guessed was the pantry window. The blind was drawn, but I found a rift in the sill. Daisy and Tom were sitting opposite each other at the kitchen table, with a plate of cold fried chicken between them and 2 bottles of ale. He, Tom, was talking intently across the table at her, and in his earnestness his hand had fallen upon and covered her own. Once in a while she looked up at him and nodded in agreement. They weren't happy, and neither of them had touched the chicken or the ale, and yet they weren't unhappy either. There was an unmistakable air of natural intimacy about the picture, and anybody would have said that they were conspiring together. As I tiptoed from the porch, I heard my taxi filling its way along the dark road toward the house. Gatsby was waiting where I'd left him in the drive. Is it all quiet up there? He asked anxiously. Yeah, it's all quiet. I hesitated. You better come home and get some sleep. He shook his head. I want to wait here till Daisy goes to bed. Good night, old sport. He put his hands in his coat pockets and turned back eagerly in his scrutiny of the house, as though my presence marred the sacredness of the vigil. So I walked away and left him standing there in the moonlight, watching over nothing. Okay, so something about Daisy and and Tom, they're perfect for each other because not only do they come from the same background and the same type of people, but they're also irresponsible. They don't take responsibility for their actions. And I mean, you see this sometimes with like your rich kids, okay? Mommy and daddy are able to bail them out, okay, with some money. And that's the mentality here. Just throw some money at it and it'll make it disappear. And or, make someone else take the blame. And that's what Daisy is going to allow Gatsby to do. She's not going to take responsibility for the hit and run and the manslaughter of Myrtle Wilson. She's not. Um, and Tom's not going to take the responsibility of cheating on his wife. So they're a match made in Hades, I guess, because sure not heaven. But they're perfect for each other in this aspect, and it's sad. It's not a good thing, but and Nick sees that in the window. He's like, they aren't happy, but they're not unhappy, and they're perfect for each other. So we'll see what happens with the whole Gatsby thing. Okay, but that's for chapter